This marker behind me is the floods over the different years. The very top is 2002. I'm going up this elevator. It was built in 1904 and it's 54 metres high. It is a good view, although I wasn't so keen on the elevator. Stopped for a bite to eat at the little town of Pirna. This was one of 6 sanitariums that the Nazis used for their secret T4 programme, whereby the mentally and physically disabled will be taken to a place like this and then eventually murdered. So I'm now in the basement of the sanitarium. This is the waiting room, where the inmates will be waiting before they go to get gassed, just next door. This is the gas chamber. It's a rather innocuous looking room, and almost 14,000 mentally and physically disabled people were murdered in here. The door is gone. It was just right in front of me. You can still see traces of it on the walls. The Nazis removed it in 1942. The next few rooms are for the disposal of the bodies. So I'm now standing in the morgue, and the next room on was the crematorium. In the corner of this room was where the crematoria were. So usually about 2 bodies burnt at a time, and then the ashes were taken out and just dumped. Large bones ground up in a mill. Obviously families would be writing to find out news of their relations that were kept in the sanitarium, and the Nazis kept that a secret. And they'd just be reported that they'd died, and then they would just send them some random ashes. After the war, the hillside next to the sanitarium was excavated by archaeologists, and that's where the bodies or the ashes were dumped. And this cabinet contains some of their personal effects. Behind me is the memorial to the victims here. News eventually began to leak out of what the Nazis were doing, and in 1941 Archbishop Galen spoke out against the T4 programme, and as a result the Nazis closed it down, and all the 6 sanitarium were closed. However, most of the inmates were simply moved to other concentration camps or extermination camps, and there were T4 experts there anyway who continued the killing. Just coming into Dresden now, where I'm stopping for the rest of the day. Here I am in Dresden, the Florence of the Elbe, with all these beautiful Baroque buildings. Of course, many of them are post-war reconstructions. On the night of 13th of February 1945, the first of 3 bombing raids that took place over the next couple of days was launched by the RAF. In total, over 1,000 bombers were used between Americans and the US Army Air Force, and almost 4,000 tons of bombs were dropped on Dresden. In the first wave of the attack, the first aircraft dropped flares, magnesium flares, to signal the target, and then the next wave of RAF bombers dropped a mix of high explosive and incendiary bombs. After 3 hours, when the German fire crews were putting the fires out, a second wave came over and bombed the city again. The next day, the Americans did it as well. The incendiary bombs in particular created a firestorm, where the rising heat from the fire sucked in oxygen at ground level and created a whirlwind which just fed the fires with more and more oxygen. Ever since, it's been a very controversial attack. Did the British really need to attack Dresden? Behind me is probably the most famous building in all of Dresden, the Frauenkirche. This was completely destroyed in the February 45 bombing raids, and the communists left it as a heap of rubble, as a memorial to war. After reunification in 1991, the council decided to rebuild it, and it was complete in 2005. This bit of wall behind me is actually part of the dome of the original Frauenkirche, and the little memorial that you can read there tells the story of a man who comes in the next day after the bombing raid to find his wife and he watches the dome collapse. The cross at the top was made by a silversmith in Coventry, which Coventry, as you know, was heavily bombed during the war by the Luftwaffe. The silversmith that made it, his father was actually a bomber pilot and he took part in the Dresden raid. This is the original cross from the top of the dome, pulled from the rocket. I think it's safe to say they've done a good job with the rebuilding. So why was the bombing of Dresden controversial? Well, the Allies argued that Dresden had many factories that contributed to the German war effort. It was also a major rail marshalling hub, and in fact those were the main targets of the bombers. However, much of the destruction took place in the city centre, in other words in the cultural heart of Dresden, and people that argue it was morally wrong say that, well, the rail yards and the factories weren't really hit. In military terms, the Allies argued that it hastened the end of the war. Counter-argument to that, of course, it was February 1945, the Germans were already in retreat, the war was going to be over in a matter of time, and therefore the destroying of the cultural heart of Dresden was very much just an act of cultural vandalism, basically. Behind me is a demonstration of socialist realist art, just a reminder that after the war of Dresden, it was in the DDR. It's a pity that the trees grow over it, but I guess then they're not so keen on remembering the DDR here anymore.